You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Welcome back to episode 16 of Arsenal Pass. I'm Brendan Patrick, joined always by calling champion Hayden Dale. Hayden, how are you doing?
I'm good, Brendan. How are you?
Good to have you on. So this week we're back with one of our class deep dives. For these episodes, Hayden and I dedicate an entire episode to breaking down a specific class and constructed, with a focus on core fundamentals, ways to build and play the hero, key cards, strengths and weaknesses, how to win, and ultimately how to beat it. Our third installment is with the sometimes doubted, endlessly adored, favorite pet deck and underdog of Flesh and Blood, Ranger. But first, Hayden, let's hear about your week in Fab.
Yeah, good week in Fab so far. Actually, was really lucky in the weekend, and lucky in some regards. Was actually able to play a skirmish event. So locally here in Australia, we had a bunch of skirmishes that were postponed, unfortunately, and one of my local stores decided that they still wanted to run it, and so I think the only option to end up running it was to move it to online, which is something they've not really done a lot of. A lot of stores overseas are really experienced in running these online events, but for these guys, it's something a little bit new. But yeah, they managed to do it. Had an online skirmish Blitz event, which was cool. Played Kano again, as I have been for Blitz the last few weeks. Managed to sneak into the top 8, but unfortunately lost to an Ira in the quarterfinals. Actually lost my first round of the day to a chain, so started off 0-1. Won the next, it was 6 rounds, I think. So won the next 5 rounds, and then losing to Ira, who a player who took it out in the end. So no, it was a good event. Good to sort of have some contact with a lot of the local players that I'm just not seeing at the moment. Usually I'd see them most weeks, so still cool to touch base with them, which is great.
Yeah, awesome. I pretty much, on my end, I had the Gauntlet, which was pretty much all I did last week. I know we talked about it in Time of the Round, our kind of YouTube exclusive podcast. I played a lot of Amazon's New World game. Played it pretty extensively for 4 days. Then, did the old uninstall refund because it sucks. But after that, it's just been testing. I have Road to Nationals on this weekend, actually on Sunday, so I'll be going down to Houston for the weekend for a nice vacation. But we are gonna make a weekend out of it, so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, it's pretty exciting. First Road to Nationals event. It's gonna be a 64-player event. It'll be interesting. I don't know much about the Houston scene. Obviously, Jacob Burns is down there. It's the first player in the US to get to 1K XP. I've played against him a few times in online events. Other than that, not familiar with the scene down there. I'm sure there'll be plenty of people from Dallas and my play groups that are going to be going down as well.
Is it capped? So 64 a capped event?
Yeah, 64 capped.
Yeah. Nice. Cool. Well, best of luck.
Yeah, 64 capped, and there's a lot of people who aren't able to go. Let's just say that. So these things are in extremely high demand. I know we kind of foreshadowed this on one of the pods from a few weeks back, but yeah, Road to Nationals, if you're in sort of a high density Flesh and Blood area, are not easy to get into. It was basically a part-time job for me, just lining these all up.
Yeah, right. Okay, so that's going to leave you with 6 rounds of Swiss cut to top 8, I'm guessing. 4 players.
Yeah, so that's what it should be. What it will be, we'll see. That's usually how stuff goes, but sometimes, especially with things like Road to Nationals and skirmishes, the stores I don't think this store, because obviously 64 people are pretty big, but sometimes the stores will kind of just do their own thing. Which I know sounds funky if you don't live in North America, but trust me, it's just like, sometimes they're just like, nah, we're doing 5 rounds and cut the top whatever because we don't have time.
Yeah,
so that could always happen.
Restrictions, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it could, who knows? But yeah, I'm prepared for 6, cut to top 8, and I'm excited. I feel confident in my deck, confident in my play. I think I practiced enough.
Cool. Yeah, exciting. Yeah, we talked about obviously in Time of the Round last week about the upcoming Road to Nationals and our expectations and predictions, and now we're here. We're less than 2 days away, so yeah, going to be a great weekend, and I'll be casting my eye across the the internet, keeping up to date as much as possible. I know there's Road to Nationals, there's actually 3 Road to Nationals, in Australia this weekend. Unfortunately, I won't be able to attend any of them. The state that I live in is still in lockdown, whereas the other states are coming out of lockdown, so they're going to get to play their events, which is great for them. So I'll just be watching from a distance.
Mm-hmm. Well, anyway, why don't you take us into the news, Hayden?
100%. So we've already covered the first topic, Brendan. Road to Nationals this weekend, kicking off. Wanted to also talk about Crucible of War. So, I mean, it's been kind of quiet, but, all the hype of Tales of Aria, we've just had Monarch, but Crucible of War Unlimited is dropping this this Friday. So, all those people who have maybe struggled to find reasonably priced singles from Crucible on the secondary market, sort of, I guess, now's the time to go and find those cards you might have been missing, those Gorganian Tomes or whatever your
Courage of Blade Elves.
Yeah,
I mean, there's so
exactly.
many, so
Skeletas.
many key pieces. Yeah, so many key pieces in Crucible. Honestly, it couldn't have come quick enough because those prices are ridiculous. I know, especially if you're located somewhere in like Europe, Crucible was a brutal set. So hopefully this will fix all of that. And the kind of the market in general is pretty reasonable nowadays. So it should be quite good.
It's crazy. I think, obviously a lot of scarcity in some of those chase cards from the set. But it's crazy to think it's been 10 months since Crucible came out. So, it's been a long wait for the Crucible of War Unlimited. But it feels like, and it seems like from what we've seen so far, we won't have to wait anywhere near as long for Unlimited sets in the future, thankfully. So, excited. I'll be picking up a couple of boxes. There's some play sets of cards I still want to pick up. I kind of just want a crack product, to be honest. I
was going to say, you really need Crucible stuff?
But I've bought 2 boxes, and if there's any other singles I want to pick up, I'll just pick them up.
I am interested to know if, it's probably already been said, but I want to know if the Fallout Twinning Blade is in Unlimited.
Doesn't appear to be from what we've seen so far. It looks like no Fallout Twinning Blade. There's, Shiana's Rainbow Foil.
That's funky. So, in bigger and more exciting news and on theme with this podcast, being Ranger, we do have the art for the Blitz decks and boosters for Tales of Aria, and we have confirmed that there is a Ranger. I mean, not too much to say there. I don't know how to speculate. I've actually decided I'm not going to be speculating on Tales of Aria at all because LSS just pulls the wool over
You're always
our eyes
wrong.
Everything. Oh yeah, I mean, like it's and not, you're so far off, like it's not even
so
close.
True.
Like yeah. But anyway, so the preview week is going to be starting with the first week of September. It will lead into the world premiere in Vegas and pre-release on the weekend of the 18th of September and release on the 25th. I'm really excited. I've heard amazing things about the limited format. I really enjoyed the limited format of Monarch. I didn't get to play too much, but then again, here in the US, we weren't very incentivized to play that format. So
that
did help you test. Yeah, it did help you test, but 2022 is going to be big for the callings, I would assume.
Surely.
So we're gonna, So we already know there are some limited callings coming up, but I think that 2022 is going to be packed full of callings here in the United States.
Even I was just thinking, you said you're not going to speculate, and you just said Ranger confirmed, but Ranger isn't actually confirmed, right? No, have they said officially, or did James White
said it on?
Okay.
He confirmed on the Fabled Hunters.
Because I wouldn't be surprised if all this imagery and what we see so far looks exactly like a Ranger, but doesn't mean LSS is printing a Ranger.
He did go ahead and confirm it. It's been a pretty funny situation with that ICV2 magazine has just spoiled like everything. It's weird. Anyway, so we do have some cool YouTube content out there. We had an Azalea and Chain gameplay go up on Channel Fireball. If you're anyway interested in Chain or Azalea, I recommend you go watch the video. The gameplay is a bit one-sided, but I think it's got top-level banter. So
I don't even think it's that one-sided, but okay.
Yeah. For me, I think it's like an A+ content video. Unfortunately, Channel Fireball published it on like the wrong playlist, so it pretty much has 0 views and no engagement. I think our top comment is, "Are you still scamming people?" I think that was directed at Channel Fireball. Hope that wasn't directed at us. But yeah, go check that out because I was actually really happy with how that turned out. And it's actually a pretty cool video seeing Azalea, and Azalea actually blows out Chain pretty badly with the old Red in the Ledger. Anyway, we do have the Prism deck tech on our channel, Arsenal Pass. Very similar to the Chain deck that we put up a while ago. And yeah, very in-depth guide. It gives you kind of full sideboard plan. It's like an Iris of Reality and Luminaris hybrid deck. So really cool deck out there. And then obviously we did, last week we did Time of the Round, which is sort of a sub-podcast to this podcast, very free form. No set topics, where me and Hayden just kind of talk. and that is a YouTube exclusive up on Arsenal Pass. And the last one was a very special one because we did Hat Day, and I had a very nice sun hat.
All right, to round out the news, Brendan, just wanted to touch on one last thing. We're actually going to be doing a mailbag episode in the coming months, so I'd love to get questions from our listeners, viewers, community. So any questions you want us to answer, anything, could be from gameplay related, could be non-gameplay related, could be flesh and blood related, could be non-flesh and blood related if you wanted to. But we're asking for any questions for our mailbag episode that you might want to send in to us. You can flick those to us at arsenalpassfab@gmail.com. Just emails only for this one, please. Obviously, this is going to be a few weeks away, so trawling back through YouTube comments isn't going to be ideal. So, yeah, if you could send them over to our email, that'd be great. Otherwise, Brendan?
Yeah, for sure. I just want to say, I think it'd be super awesome if we're able to do an episode based purely off your questions. So it'd be really cool if you guys sent some in. But also, I just want to throw mine in the hat, and I'm not going to email. I'm going to go ahead and break the rules here. So my question is, why is Hayden not bond yet? And why are you tricking us? What, you fraud? Anyway, so speaking of my sun hat in the time of the round, it's time to head over to that grill because it's the command and cookout section. Hayden, what kind of question do we have this week?
What an introduction. All right, well, I guess we don't have a true question this week, but we did receive an email, and I just wanted to actually shout it out and touch on it, Brendan, because I think it's a great, it is a question in some ways, but I think it's a great shout. So Nathan had actually emailed us in and said that, him and some friends are going to Road to Nationals this season, and they were looking for, gauntlet decks. They said, he said, have you guys got any good gauntlet decks that you guys use? So I just thought, rather than us just flick a reply back to Nathan and say, go look XYZ. Just thought I'd say on the pod where we you get our gauntlet decks from when we're testing. So we talked about testing a couple of times over the past few weeks. We obviously talked about the Road to Nationals preparation episode. I think that one of the main things that we always look for is, you want to be playing and testing against the decks that people are actually going to play. So when we talk gauntlet decks, you could come up with, say, let's talk about Dorinthia, for instance. You could easily go, okay, Dorinthia, here's the main sort of list we're seeing people play from X player. In our eyes, that might not even be the best list for the given meta, but in reality, that's probably the list that people are going to net deck, right? So let's say it's a ninja. Okay, well, pretty safe to say that Kieran's list from the charity event that's just gone by is probably the best place to start for a gauntlet deck. So I'm always in favor of just saying, okay, if we're testing, if they're true gauntlet decks, we want them to be decks that we actually expect people to play, and those are the ones that are the most popular lists, right?
Yeah, I mean, I know that we don't want the answer to be go look at XYZ, but definitely do go look at Fab TCG and just net deck people, because the lazy route here is the most optimal route. If you try to brew up your own decks and, when you're brewing your own decks, obviously you can do it, right? But it seems like it's just more efficient to actually test against the decks you're going to see, since most people are going to net deck anyway. And that way you don't have also, there's a very minor issue that could come into it, is where you kind of tech your gauntlet deck to be better against X deck that everybody's piloting. This is your group's deck, and you're yeah. So I just try to avoid that bias, and it's just really easy. You just go on Flesh and Blood TCG, net deck them, and then just play whatever you got in front of you. Even if it's suboptimal, I think it's still important to play it. If I do have a deck, excuse me, that I know is definitely not as good as it could be, and to a significant amount, sometimes I will improve the deck. But that improved version is not the gauntlet deck. I will test it out, but I will stay on, whatever I found online in the long run for testing.
Yeah, if it's for testing into specific matchups, to say we've got a deck that we believe is maybe the best deck, or a deck that we're really heavily considering playing, then we're going to run that into, gauntlet decks once we're doing our sort of testing run of matchups and planning out sideboards and just, sort of working on the last few cards. When it's earlier in the testing process and we're actually just trying to throw stuff into that, if I take the Dorinthia example, for instance, I built up a few Dorinthia lists over the season, and those were, specifically targeted lists, so they were very different. But then I'm not playing that into certain other decks just, as a gauntlet deck, because it's not the gauntlet deck. We went and took, Aaron Curtis's Warrior deck, his Dorinthia deck from the charity event, because we believe that, probably something that people are going to play. So That's the best way. I mean, in terms of where you can look, Fab TCG, of course, if this is for more of a local event, maybe you know the meta a bit better, you know the kind of deck list that people are on, then you can just, I guess, extrapolate that and have a deck list from that. Or you can even go on the Discord and look at the conversations happening there. People tend to pin decks that are popular or that people are talking about a lot, so they could be good gauntlet decks as well.
Yeah. I definitely stay away from the Discord. There's a lot of cooks in the kitchen. They're definitely smoking what they're selling over there. Some crazy ideas.
Sure, I mean, you got to take it with some grains of salt.
The Discord is the Wild West of deck building. It's ridiculous. They've cracked. I feel like they've cracked the format every single day. I always hear about some craziness. Anyway, enough dogging on the Discord. I'm a big fan of the Discord, obviously. Hayden, why don't you take us into the main topic of the pod, Mrs. Azalea?
Yeah, well, Ranger. We're talking about Ranger today. Obviously, for our class deep dives, we've gone through Ninja already. We've also done Wizards. So we're back to Arcane Rising this week, and we're talking about Ranger. With the impending new Ranger in Tales of Aria, thought what better time to come back to a bit of a fan favorite. So the Ranger class was introduced to us in Arcane Rising with Azalea, of course. So today Azalea is the only hero that we have for our Ranger. But when we talk about our class deep dives, we try and I guess going forward we're going to try and do this a bit more, is talk a bit of a broader sense as well. Rather than just speak specifically 100% about Azalea here, we are going to talk about Ranger in general. And, hopefully that is a help for those who maybe don't play Azalea now, but might be picking up the new Ranger in Tales of Aria. We can look back at some of the cards that are important to Ranger now, or the play patterns or play styles that can be beneficial. So, Brennan, what makes the Ranger class unique? And I guess this is a bit of an introduction to Azalea in many ways, because Azalea is, as we say, our only Ranger hero, but a bit more broadly. So, Azalea is a Ranger that has no traditional weapon that uses the combat chain. So just like Kano has with the staff, instead of allowing you to play an attack, Ranger uses arrows so far. So Ranger is all about those arrow attacks, and we could see some different design space explored in the future. It's clear that LSS have wanted to look at that bow and arrow aspect. All the attacks for Ranger so far are arrows. So the other unique thing about Ranger that we see with Azalea is hero ability that can, manipulate the deck. So allowing cards to be played that aren't in hand, which is quite a unique ability. We don't see that in a lot of other cards or across other heroes. And also that gives some inbuilt evasion. So with that dominate is quite unique. And the fact that all of Azalea's effects, or all of Azalea's attacks, Ranger's attacks, see, I almost did it. Ranger's attacks have those on-hit effects. Yeah. So very unique as well.
Yeah, and we forgot to mention my favorite part of Ranger that is almost utilized never, is the traps. It's funny because I was looking at the card gallery here of Arcane Rising, and I was looking at this card, Rockslide Trap, and I've literally never seen the card. I saw the art, and it was like seeing it for the first time, because I don't think I've ever seen this card. But traps are just an awesome concept that I hope gets explored further in Ranger. So far, I honestly have not seen it used at all. I have seen some tripwire trap. That's about it. But it's a great concept. Like having the kind of a pay, it's like a pay X effect on a defense reaction is so awesome. And I think it makes us like Arsenal Matters part of Azalea, or part of Ranger, just really, really cool because it's both on offense and on defense. But yeah, Azalea definitely sort of a asymmetric hero with that weapon, with the way it dominates, and how it utilizes that arsenal with the arrows.
Yeah, it is a really unique hero. It's probably in many ways I look at it as the most unique class so far, because of obviously we have Wizard, who is very unique in the arcane damage side of it, but I think just pairing the weapon and the way that you draw cards, play cards into Arsenal, play cards out of Arsenal is a very unique play pattern, which is really cool. And one thing I want to say as well, you're just talking about crystal cards. One thing we've seen so far as Monarchs come out is that there's a subset of crystal cards that have really felt like their design space was geared towards heroes that came to us in Monarch. I think about some of the Brute cards that we got that have probably paired a lot better with Levia, or even some of the warrior cards that have, like Hidden Run, maybe that pairs well with the new weapons that have come with Subaltern, things like that. So I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of these cards that we saw in Crucible, at least a few of them work in well with the new Ranger that we're about to see. I think about a card like Poison the Tips. Could that see play coming into the new format with the new Ranger? Could that work really well with that hero for whatever reason? Or Perch Grapplers, or maybe the traps even. Maybe that we're going to see that design space explored even more, which would be awesome because I agree. I love the traps. So it'd be cool to see how that kind of plays out.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Brendan, why don't we talk a little bit about, I guess, the history of Ranger in Flesh and Blood. We always like to talk about the history of these classes. Ninja last week was a lot of history because it's the most storied class, I guess, so far in Flesh and Blood.
Dominant. Yeah, it's been a dominant class, a very modular class. There's a lot that goes into it. I think on the Azalea side, it's a bit more straightforward.
The Ranger side, yeah. I mean, one thing I would say about the history of Ranger, I guess it was pretty instantly, fan favorite with the release of Arcane Rising. People were really excited about the design of Ranger. Azalea seemed like a really cool hero. These sort of, coming from the pits as Azalea does, that kind of in the shadows aspect of a Ranger. I guess people were talking about, like Assassin. Is that what we're going to get? We got a Ranger in the end in the form of Azalea. And people were really excited about that sort of design space being explored, the artwork that we saw with this hero, the bow and arrow aspect that was so new for everyone. So people really explored that. And I know we had a mutual friend who was a massive fan of the Ranger class and still is, and I think has tried every which way they could to make Ranger decks viable in certain formats.
Yep, that is the first player to ever be living legend. That is Sasha Markovic. He only plays Ranger nowadays, from what I understand. To test my sanity, right? Like he plays a lot of Ranger. He plays a lot of 3 of a kind OTK, which we'll talk about more in kind of our fun facts. There is actually a lot going on with Ranger that I think that a lot of people don't know about, especially with the more controlling strategies and things like that. But yeah, when Ranger came out on Arcane Rising, it's an interesting deck. It just didn't really, I don't know, it didn't fit too well in the meta, especially with, I think we saw a lot of mech control. We were still seeing a lot of Katsu control. It is pretty good against defense reactions, if I am correct there, but I don't know. Yeah, I think more of increased attention, which is actually Crucible.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely in a weird spot for a kind of a meta that was dominated by Mech, Ninja, and I think a lot of Dorinthia back then.
Yeah, a lot of Dorinthia still, yeah, which was difficult, and even Guardian floating around. It just felt at the time when Arcane Rising happened that the deck building of the wider community was still really new. Like it wasn't as advanced as it has been over the last few months. As people get better and better, more players come into the game. So I think it was Azalea being and Ranger as a class being touched a lot less in terms of that, trying to find strategies to attack the meta. So it just had a bit of a tough time, I guess, in Arcane Rising. And then with Crucible, I think it gained even more fans, Azalea. People were like so hyped about Remorseless, cards like this. But if we're being honest and we look back at Ranger's history so far, it's the least successful hero in Classic Constructed Flesh and Blood, and along outside of the Crucible, young heroes that we got, it's the least successful hero so far in Flesh and Blood. I mean, it and Viscerai have probably struggled the most, but Viscerai we saw make top 8s of Road to Nationals, multiple Road to Nationals, things like this. Whereas for and so that OTK deck, Viscerai deck, that seemed to play skirmishes. Well. Yeah, and skirmishes. Yeah. So whereas for Azalea, it's been a top 8 hero there, but it's been a difficult ride so far for Ranger as a class. But hopefully we'll see that change as we move into the future. Well, I hope at least.
Yeah, there's still a lot of Ranger story is still yet to be written. We do have another Ranger coming out soon in Tales of Aria, so who knows where that will take us. Could be very exciting. But yeah, in terms of kind of like spicy details on the Ranger history, we don't have much history to go off because just not a lot of people have played this deck over the course, since it was released. But maybe that will change. Some
of us
soon.
have played it for 10 months.
Yeah, I forgot that Hayden Dale went through a period of psychosis where he played Azalea for 3 months and read an article on it. Read a 3-month-long article. That's probably the biggest note in history is that Hayden Dale made the mistake of playing this class for 3 months.
No, I think the biggest note so far is that Ranger as a class has a lot of fans. It may not have been the most successful, but it's truly an underdog story ready to break out. I think there's a lot of Ranger fans, and there's quite a lot of Azalea fans as well. So, but I think you have a bit of a fun fact to share for us, which is actually, to be honest, an archetype story that has now maybe become a bit of folklore, but is not just not just a complete joke though.
Yeah, I mean, I think most people haven't seen it, but the card 3 of a Kind. Basically, you can play an OTK deck in Azalea where you just play like Tomo Fiendal and 3 of a Kind and draw up to, I think it's like 10 plus cards. And then you just OTK by going again with arrows constantly on the combat chain or having a bunch of, pumps and dominating with that like last arrow in your deck. It's a really, really crazy deck. It's probably the most complicated deck in Flesh and Blood. I think it's actually harder to play than OTK Kano by far. I remember playing against it a lot in Constructed, actually, back when Arcane Rising first came out. And of course, that was Sasha just going deep on that archetype. But yeah, 3 of a Kind OTK, probably one of the most unique kind of strategy you can employ, because having a full grip of cards in your hand is not something that you usually see in Flesh and Blood. So having that 10-ish cards is just crazy.
Well, yeah, it's even more actually. And if people want like a fun deck to go out and play, then go and try this. As Brendan says, it's not easy to play, but you can actually goldfish a bunch with this deck. You just have to set up your bottom of your deck and know what cards you need left. But yeah, basically you can loop. You get a tome into your arsenal every turn. A tome of Fiendal. You play the 3 of a Kind from hand, and then you tome because obviously you can only play cards from arsenal. You gain all that life, so that's how you sustain as well into the late game. You block early, and then late game when you're setting up, you just don't block and you just lose life. That's fine. You have a life to play with. But yeah, you can be gaining like 10 life, 12 life, and you just keep drawing, and you can remembrance them back as well, and keep doing it for a while. And then eventually you draw your whole deck. You've gained this life, and then you can set up this turn with, obviously you've got all your take aims in your hand, so you can rapid fire to give all your arrows go again, and then you can take aim a bunch of arrows, and you can actually, because of the combination of endless arrows and stuff as well, your opponent and take aims, your opponent's not actually going to be able to block them all, so you'll get endless arrows back. You'll have enough arrows basically. It's not impossible to do. It's very fun, but also very difficult, and I don't know if it's that good, but
Yeah, it is extremely difficult. That's definitely the limiting factor on this deck. It's extremely difficult to pull off. Another cool fact with Ranger is that in Arcane Rising, obviously we know that Viscerae kind of pile, or at least basically just throwing all your cards together and playing Runeblade cards was a serious issue because of there being no weapons in the format. Right? Correct, in limited. Sorry, fatigue was pretty much something you were facing almost every time you went to an event. That being said, Azalea had a pretty good way of combating fatigue if she opened up multiple salvage shots, because you could loop those on the bottom of your deck essentially endlessly, which was a really cool strategy in Limited. And Azalea in Limited was actually one of my favorite heroes, but again, I think that it was by far the hardest deck to play. Like, it was very painful to play into that format in terms of brain power, and then you would still be slightly unfavored sometimes against Davis. Well, I know you have very strong opinions on that format, but I found that you wouldn't be immensely more favored over a Viscerae that was just playing a 40 card deck.
Yeah, I think Azalea could genuinely beat that that sort of strategy quite easily in that format. And I think if we had a proper Arcane Rising limited format, we would have actually we might be talking about Ranger a little bit differently, because Ranger might have actually had some success. It would have been in the limited space, but had some success because what was really cool, obviously you have Azalea's hero ability, which is inbuilt evasion. You could, and use only 20 life for the 3 heroes, 15 for Kano. You could actually set up the bottom of your deck pretty easily to deal dominate damage well over and above that, and there wasn't many defense reactions. There was a lot of cards that blocked too. There wasn't ways to gain life outside of Sunkiss. So what you could actually do is very easily play the mid game, play just a very tight sort of 30, maybe 32 card deck, set up the bottom of your deck. You just had to know the damage in your deck, but you could actually make sure that against those Viscerae piles, that's not much they could do, because you just come in with like 8 dominate, 7 dominate, 10 dominate, and there wasn't much they could do.
Mm-hmm. And now I want to talk about my favorite kind of fun fact about Azalea or Ranger. It's actually a bit of folklore, a rumor. So there's a very prominent card in Ranger called Remorseless. And Remorseless says, if Remorseless is put into your arsenal phase up until end of turn, it gains defense reactions can't be played from your arsenal to Remorseless's chain link. This is not the important part. So the second part of this text is if Remorseless hits a hero until the end of their next turn, whenever they play an action card, they lose 1 life. So the rumor that I've heard is that this was originally designed to be action, but it was changed before being released because it would have too much of an impact on mech, right? So if it was printed the other way, they would lose a life every time they shot with the gun or something like that. But instead, it's just off the action cards. So significant power kind of downgrade, but who knows if it was true.
I wonder. I'm skeptical, but I also think that if that had been how it was printed, the card could have had a lot of issues into the future as like a really powerful, like truly powerful hate card, because of the way that we've already seen certain classes want to interact, not with cards out of hand as much, but with doing some actions on the board and a combination of cards out of hand, like attacking with weapon multiple times, things like that. So I wonder if that could have just been a bit of an issue if that was true. But it might have been nice to have.
Might have been nice to have a little bit of power in Ranger.
I do feel like that's the same kind of thing of like, Chain originally only had 3 intellect.
Who says that? What? I've never heard that one. Jeez. Anyway, Chain. We'll leave
Data Doll had 4 intellect. It was the most busted hero.
Oh my god! Yeah. Why don't you take us into how to build it, Hayden?
Yep. So as we do with these class deep dives, we get into how to build it, and where we like to start is talk through some of the really key cards of the class as a whole. We will be focusing a bit more on Azalea because that's the current hero we have, but we will talk about some of these cards just in the context of what Ranger wants to do and building game plans around Ranger. So let's get into Brennan. So obviously Arcane Rising was our first glimpse of Azalea, and you know what, as always, we like to talk about the legendary equipments because they're quite powerful cards, and Skullbone Crosswrap is another very powerful legendary. It's interesting, we've talked Wizard, Ninja, and now Ranger, and I truly think 3 of the most powerful legendaries in this game in the form of Mask of Momentum, Stormstriders, and Skullbone Crosswrap.
Yeah, I think that's probably true, except for Carrion Husk, which just blows them all out of the water.
Yeah, we've talked about that yet. It's fine. So yeah, I think Skullbone Crosswrap is really important because obviously it's a legendary that we've seen very little play from, but that's because it's obviously a class-specific legendary, and we haven't seen as much Azalea, I guess, in a competitive sense anyway. But the once per turn, action of Skullbone Crosswrap to turn a face down card in your arsenal face up and opt 1 is massive, and go again, of course, for that is massive. That allows you to manipulate your deck, which is a really powerful ability. I would say that probably it obviously pairs really well with Azalea's hero ability. But what we might see from Skullbone Crosswrap in the future is it'd be even better depending on what the next lot of Rangers do. Whether you have a hero ability like Azalea's or whether you don't, the ability to still opt 1 is massively powerful. It helps you set up draws. It helps you with a card like Death Dealer where you get to choose the card that you're going to draw. So maybe it's not maybe it's not Azalea as the Ranger using Death Dealer and Skullbone Crosswraps in the future, but maybe it's another Ranger, and that could be just equally as powerful alongside maybe they have a different hero ability which lets you go wide or something. So Skullbone Crosswrap super powerful. The fact it has Arcane Barrier and Blade Break 1 as well, I think is super important. One thing I always say is like these these equipments, these legendary equipments that have Blade Break or don't defend at all, I think are a really good indication of just some of the power levels of these legendaries as well.
Yeah, Skullbone Crosswrap has some of the funkiest art in the game. I know I'm getting off topic here, but I have no idea what is going on. It looks like some sort of like future age like helmet that he's wearing.
Yeah, it's cool.
Like, I've been trying to figure that thing out forever. But yeah, I mean, obviously an immensely powerful legendary, and I agree with you, arguably one of the most powerful. Mm-hmm. But I want to talk about, I want to run into the Majestics. And the Majestic I always hear about and why Azalea, this is the why is Azalea a good pick in any meta. It's going to be Red in the Ledger. So Red in the Ledger is a Ranger action, arrow attack. It costs 1, and it pitches for 1. It's Azalea specialization, so Azalea only. And it says, if Red in the Ledger hits a hero, they can't play or activate more than 1 action during their turn. And it hits for 5, blocks for 3. So really, really good card, really powerful card. Obviously, the effect is incredible. similar to Spinal Crush. And you don't have to hit them for 3 or more. You just got to hit them for 1. So
4 or
things,
more.
Yeah. 4 or more, correct. Yeah.
Guardian resident here.
I've got PTSD from getting smashed so much in our testing group. But yeah, I mean, Razor Reflex hits red in the ledger. It can be Snapdragons. It's just an incredibly powerful card. And if it hits, it can be devastating for the opponent.
Yeah, it can, take an opponent's whole game plan and sort of tear it up, basically, or at least one full turn cycle, which is massive. So, that paired with, obviously it's a Azalea specialization, which is really key. We know that we're not going to see this effect, the Red in the Ledger effect in other ranges in the future. I mean, we could on other cards, but not specifically Red in the Ledger as a card. And I think that's really important. The fact that it's a Azalea specialization is for a reason. But the ability to obviously give that dominate with Azalea's hero ability means that you can find this card at really key times or really key turns of the game and just put your opponent completely on the back foot. Your opponent could be set up to take a bunch of damage from you this turn, just to come back with their huge turn that they've been setting up, and then a Red in the Ledger can actually just break that apart and could be the swing that you need to either get back into the game or take the game on the front foot and close it up from there.
Mm-hmm. We spoke about it a little bit already, but obviously I think this is going to be, it's probably my favorite card in terms of design space for Ranger. It's definitely the most interesting. So it's going to be 3 of a kind. It's just a Ranger action. Cost 1, pitches for red. Says draw 3 cards. Until end of turn, you may only play cards from Arsenal. Go again, and it blocks for 2, and obviously has no attack value. So like we talked about, I mean, I haven't seen much 3 of a kind outside of the OTK deck. I also haven't played against much Azalea in Constructed, but in that OTK deck, I think you can do one of the most unique things that's possible in this game, right? Which is draw 10 to 15 cards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if we talk about 3 of a kind as a card, just in I guess Ranger as in general, rather than Azalea, because I think in Azalea it's seen less play. I mean, it is definitely playable and it helps you refill hands. It helps you play off 2 card hands or 1 card hands with Tunic, which is and can be massive. Obviously, there's that restriction about only being able to play cards from Arsenal, which can be difficult. But, with Azalea's hero ability, with Reload, with a card like Bullseye Braces as well, the equipment, you can pair with that to make sure you get multiple attacks and actually get a lot of value out of 3 of a kind. But it feels to me like 3 of a kind is a card that we're going to see explored a lot in the future because of that ability. I'd love to see Rangers able to use 3 of a kind in, certain ways. Maybe we get an item that allows you to put, crack and put a card into Arsenal, something like that. Like there could be these really cool setups, and 3 of a kind would be, I guess, the cornerstone of potentially a lot of those as well. So yeah, really excited for what 3 of a kind might do. I think while we talked about Red and Ledger, we should talk about Nock the Death Whistle as well. And I'm just thinking, just for the purposes of this, just for the purpose of this, I'm gonna not read a lot of these cards, but Nock the Death Whistle is the tutor that puts it on top of your deck with Reload, which is really important, 0 cost, and it's blue. So, and really interesting that we have an Azalea specialization that's blue when it felt like the design space of Ranger when it first came out with Azalea was really geared around like red and yellow cards predominantly, and then you get this specialization that's a tutor that is blue. But in keeping with, I guess, a lot of the other tutors in this game, a lot of them are blue. Obviously, Lessons in Love was yellow, but the rest in that set were blue with Become the Arknight and 2 yellow, 2 blue. So it was interesting that we got a blue one with Nock the Death Whistle. But obviously a card that you can pitch early because of that. So you can pitch it early and then set it up for late game to guarantee, a lot of really strong dominate effects with the key arrows. So, super came out as a super rare originally. Obviously, no longer we have super rare. So presumably this would have been a Majestic, same as Endless Arrows. So Endless Arrows is another really interesting card for Ranger in general. I think we're going to see this card a lot going forward. Azalea's already utilized this card a lot, but Endless Arrows, that 0 cost 4 attack at red that if it hits goes back into your hand, a recurring, repeating threat. Even if this is the last card from your hand, if your opponent lets it hit, it comes back to your hand, you can Arsenal. It's a little bit like a Snatch in so many ways for the Ranger class, which is really cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and another card that can go pretty well with that is going to be Rapid Fire. Until end of turn, arrows you control again, go again. So, obviously it has reload, so really important as well. But yeah, it can really allow Azalea to string together those very long combat chains, which is honestly where I thought, The design space is this go tall, dominate, hit triggers, but it also seems to have an aspect of go wide in it as well.
Yeah, Rapid Fire is one of the most interesting cards, I think, for Ranger in my eyes. As you said, there's been like a go tall design space with Ranger so far and a go wide with what we've seen with Azalea into Arcane Rising and Crucible. But Rapid Fire feels like it has this ability to potentially be used or utilized really effectively in the future. A card that is a yellow pitch and has an effect like this, which is a large turn effect. So, until end of turn, it gives all your arrows go again and reloads. The fact that this card is printed in yellow feels to me like, it's a card that the designers are telling you to pitch early, set up for late game with a bunch of really efficient arrows. And, while Azalea, I think, can do that to some degree, I think hopefully we see a bit more of Rapid Fire in the future. I know I played quite a bit of Rapid Fire when I was playing Azalea because I was trying to set up this sort of in-game against certain matchups where I would try and actually throw 3 really impactful arrows so that it would force my opponent to block, or would actually guarantee that I get through some of the on-hit effects, and I would then just start to try and snowball from there. I actually had this kind of build that was a little bit operated, sometimes go wide, sometimes go tall, depending on whether I was dominating attacks or not. And I thought that was quite fun, but it definitely didn't get the best out of Rapid Fire, which I'm hoping that we see in the future. Brendan, last card I wanted to talk about specifically is Take Aim, because I think you can't really go past this card. It was a powerhouse in Limited. I think this was a card, at Red that I would actually first pick in Limited format and Draft, but in Constructed, the ability to give a Ranger attack at Red +3 for 0 cost, and also reload. We know reload comes at a premium because obviously we can only use Death Dealer once per turn. So that that reload can be super important, especially if you've arsenaled a non-arrow card. You need ways to possibly get more than 1 arrow into your arsenal per turn. So that plus a buff meant that this was a really clear way to set up sort of more taller arrows, which worked really well with, of course, Azalea's ability. What we'll see from Take Aim in the future, I'm not sure, but I think this is a card that's going to be reasonably staple in a lot of Ranger decks.
Yeah, and I have to interject and add in my fun fact for this card, which this art is actually, I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe it's actually in the lore book, which was released in 2019 at the, I think maybe even before
really?
Welcome to Wraith. Yeah, it's actually in the back. So it was kind of our first shot of a Ranger. I remember people were telling me like Necromancer because they saw, the thing that was being shot, all that good stuff. But yeah, I believe this is actually in kind of the back of the Welcome to Wraith lore book.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
All right, well, we might just wrap up on the Arcane Rising arrows. Just any that we wanted to touch on. We've obviously already talked about Salvage Shot and the ability of that card in Limited to be like a build your own drone kind of effect. Drone brutality. I mean, Sikkim Shot, obviously that's the go again arrow, 4 attack for 1 at red. That can be really important for these go wide strategies. So, it does cost 1 for 4. So there is a bit of a downside to that. But obviously, if you're using a Death Dealer, you're drawing cards. All these arrows, to an extent, apart from Red Rider Shot, have an on-hit effect. Any arrows that you wanted to touch on, Brendan?
No, I want to get into the good stuff. I want to get into Crucible of War. Crucible of War, whenever we do this class of Crucible of War is what I can't wait to get into, because it seems like Crucible of War is where they gave us all the spice, right? Like every single card I feel like is trying to tell a story in Crucible of War. I
agree. Yeah, the design space is like further explored. Like, and that makes sense, right? Welcome to Wraith and Arcane Rising were really foundational sets to the game. And then with Crucible, it's just like, as soon as I saw some of these cards spoiled, it's like, wow, like this is not something I expected them to do. This is really taking a different direction. Obviously, we have traps here. We have some instants as well. Why don't we just kick straight off and let's talk about the equipment. We might not have a lot to say about it right now, but I think it's an interesting card in Perch Grapplers.
Yep. Really, really interesting card. I mean, does add a lot more block value for Azalea, which is probably the least interesting thing about it, but always welcomed. Perch Grapplers does say action, 2 resources. Destroy Perch Grapplers until end of turn. Face up arrow cards played from your arsenal gain Go Again, and Perch Grapplers itself does have Go Again. Hayden, have you used this card in any interesting ways since it came out?
Yeah, I know this card has been probably not as utilized because people have just stuck with Snapdragon Scalers, because a lot of the Azalea decks so far, and we saw it with the Devastation with Nuisance deck, have been really redline focused. So that 2 cost action, while it's a card face up on the table, so you're not using a card, the 2 resources is actually kind of the constraining part of it. I did play around with a few builds that used Perch Grapplers, so they were a lot more sort of yellow focused, yellow line focused with some blues in there for in game. And Perch Grapplers could definitely, do a really good job for you late game. One of the I guess the issues though is on the fact that it says face up arrow cards. So if you reload something, unless you're able to get that face up before you play it, it's not actually going to have to go again. So you need to like skull and cross wrap it or something like that to actually have it face up so that it has to go again. If you just reload the card straight up, of course, reload puts it face down into your arsenal. So it doesn't actually work that well with reload, which is really interesting. So this kind of tells me, I guess, a little bit that I think we're going to see further design space with Perch Grapplers. I think, in fact, I would like stake money on it that we're going to see further design space with Perch Grapplers into the future.
Surely, right. Talk to me about Redliner, because that is a real, it's very interesting always to get a second weapon, but it seems like this weapon's use case is almost in the name, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty funny, right? So we didn't really talk specifically about Death Dealer, but we did mention it a lot, and we talked about, and we're going to talk about the strategies in a minute. But, Redliner is a zero cost to put a card into Arsenal, but you don't draw the card like you do with Death Dealer. So it's trying to do, in my eyes, a very different thing. Death Dealer basically gives you that card back, or gives you that resource back if you're playing a really redline deck. Whereas with Redliner, it's like, okay, you don't pay anything up front, you just get your arrow into Arsenal. I really struggle with Redliner because every other weapon in the game attacks, and Redliner just says, well, I'm going to let you attack with the card, which is, obviously the arrows have a little bit above rate on their attacks because of the on-hit effects, but am I excited about that? Not overly. I think Redliner's place so far we've seen mostly in Blitz because of the speed of the format, with people just playing only red cards in the deck. So, like you say in the name, whereas I think in the Class Constructor format, people are trying to get a lot more value out of their cards, trying to set up their turns more. So Death Dealer is a lot more important.
Yep, and it was funny because I was about to mention, because I didn't know if you would kind of add on the end the Blitz use case of this weapon, but I've actually this weapon played a lot, but it was in Blitz. And it was specifically when we tested a lot of games of Azalea into Ira. And Azalea was able to do decently okay. Wasn't favorable, because with Redliner, Azalea was able to block with 2 to 3 cards out of their hand, and then come back with a slightly relevant attack every single turn. And in a format like Blitz, against a hero like Ira, ultra efficient, lots of damage, hit triggers, all that good stuff, it can actually allow you to participate in that game if you're on the
but then how do you win that game? You just run out of cards because you're blocking with 3, coming in with 1, whereas your opponent's attacking with 2 cards, pitching a card every time.
I didn't say you win, but you definitely have to set up a dominate,
final
right?
turn. Yeah, some final turns. But, I mean, that is what Azalea does best, right? That is her hero ability. We're going to talk about Remorseless, I guess, in a little bit of folklore, but that card sort of became, in my eyes, I guess, a partner to Ridden Ledger in terms of the way it could attack certain decks, especially mid-range to aggro decks. Remorse is not an Azalea specialization though, so we will see this card in the future in other ranges as well, which is cool, and I think it's an effect that is pretty powerful. I like I guess the other text is something that doesn't get talked about a lot, which is if it's face up in your arsenal, then defense reactions can't be played. So that just again speaks to me that I think we're going to see more of this face up in arsenal sort of less reload focused facets of Ranger, which I'm super down for. I think, clearly arrows and bows are going to stick around with Ranger. They're not just going to go and change the complete design of the class, but we've seen with other heroes them tweak it and maneuver things to give a completely different flavor to these heroes just based on the way that the heroes play with certain cards already in the format. So Remorseless is, I think, a perfect example of that. Same with Perch Grapplers. Yeah, sorry.
I just want to say, there's also, with the inclusion of Crucible, there is this very, very minor theme of defense reaction hate. So you look at a deck that wants to dominate you with relevant on-hit triggers and have, larger dominates, and that kind of strategy can obviously get blown out by defense reactions. So we see on the text of Remorseless, we see on Increasing Tension, this not being able to play defense reactions to kind of deal with the threat that the Ranger is posing.
Yeah, I mean, if you Remorseless plus Increase the Tension, your opponent can't play defense reactions from hand because of Increase the Tension, and can't play them from Arsenal because of Remorseless. So, yeah, definitely, obviously, something going on there. We haven't seen it, I guess, as much. I know people were playing both those cards when Crucible first came out. People tended to drop off a bit more and become less, I guess, Ranger focused and a little bit more generic focused with these redline decks with, more cards like Scars and nimblisms and E-strikes and things like that. So I'm sure we will see those cards again. Wanted to talk about traps, Brendan, because we already mentioned them briefly as a very, very unique thing that Ranger has. And I love these cards. So I've played a bit with Tripwire Trap, which is the red trap that says hit effects don't trigger this chain link unless the attacking hero pays 1 and defends for 4. I think that's such a cool card. A defense reaction that defends for 4 that has an extra text on it. Obviously costs 0 as well, but you do have to play it from your arsenal, which is actually is a cost because Ranger is a hero that wants to have cards in Arsenal, or at least Azalea is a hero that wants to have cards in Arsenal when they start the turn. So that card has been okay, but again, maybe it's a card that we see with further design space in the future.
And I just want to circle back slightly to these Majestics and talk about the actual first collaboration of Legend Studios with a major TV production. You can see a Demogorgon from Stranger Things in the art. No, but seriously, Feign Death. Yeah, probably one of the. I think this is the most fascinating card that Ranger got in Crucible of War. Like, its use case is super niche, but when it is good, it's great. It's actually really good into Ira too, which is funny. So Feign Death is you can only play it if you've been dealt damage, right? And the next time you be dealt damage, you can prevent it, and it's an instant. So you can take something like a Kadachi hit and then Feign Death, Command and Conquer, right? So card is really, really good. I remember this. Jason Chung wrote an article about designing cards. Yeah, so too. Yeah. He wrote an article about designing cards for future sets and future metas, and talked about how some cards wouldn't just always be good for the set they were printed in or the meta that they were printed into initially when the set was published. And Feign Death was the marquee card that was talked about. So I think that we haven't seen kind of the last of this card.
Yeah, and so there were 2 cards I remember specifically that had full articles written about them by the LSS development team, by the designing team, which was Feign Death, of course, which Jason wrote about, and like you said, talked about how that card may or may not be good now, but could be good in the future. And the design of that card is fantastic, right? Like a 1 cost, it's yellow, it's instant, it has potential to be really impactful, but comes at a cost of obviously not defending. The other card was Chris Gehring wrote about Snag, which we're now starting to see a little bit more in the format as well, but at the time was kind of laughed at as an unplayable card when it first came out. So we don't know much about maybe the ceiling of Feign Death now until we potentially get another Ranger hero. And I think that's kind of the same with the last Majestic we haven't touched on, which is Poison the Tips, which is the one that gives you arrows until the end of turn that is cut a card and has reload. So that card could be similar in some ways. I know I've actually seen some Azalea decks really try and utilize Poison the Tips because of reload and try and go wide. But it is another card where you kind of need to set it up because ideally you want to have multiple arrows to be forcing out these blocks and push damage.
Yep. I really look forward to the day that Poison the Tips is a good card, but it does seem like it would be very annoying to play against. So until end of turn, arrows you get if this hits a hero, discard a card. So in a go wide strategy, I can imagine this would be a very frustrating card to play against if it was very powerful.
Yeah,
but I want to come down. Yeah, I want to come down to the commons here. I want to come down to the most mentioned card in Flesh and Blood. Do you know what it is, Hayden?
Carrion Husk.
No, Sleep Dart. Oh my goodness, Sleep Dart. This is every Ranger's favorite tool in their toolbox because every new hero that's printed, Sleep Dart would be pretty good here, right? Turning off the opposing hero's ability if they're hit by Sleep Dart. Obviously a really cool card. Can be absolutely devastating against some heroes. We talk about Chain being prevalent in the meta. One of the big arguments for Azalea being decent into Chain, and I said arguments because it is not confirmed, is that things like Sleep Dart and things like Rend the Ledger really, really turn off Chain and what he's trying to do.
Yeah, the effect is super powerful. Like I don't think, like you say, changes the matchup and whether that's true or not true. But regardless, like the effect that is on paper is super powerful. If you do any damage, your opponent loses their hero ability next turn. For basically all of the heroes in Monarch, for instance, that's huge. For Livia not to be able to turn off that blood deck, that could be the death sentence for Livia. For Chain to not be able to go again could mean that they can only come in with 1 attack on their turn. For Bolton to no longer have this ability to attack, react, and have their big turn because they can't actually give their attack that they're buffing go again. This is super relevant, and it was maybe less relevant into some of the arcane heroes where, okay, Mech loses its hero ability to the end of turn. Not very relevant, is it? Even Kano didn't really care too much because you could just, if you were going to make any plays with the hero ability, you could just do it on their turn if it mattered, for the most part. So Sleep Dart, I think, is a card that has risen massively in value and is a card that I do really like. The problem, I think, and we'll talk about this in the game plans and the strategy and the, I guess, how to play this deck, isn't so much about the power level of these cards. It's the ability to consistently draw them and be able to have the hands to consistently play them and threaten with these on-hit effects.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think that, like you said, I mean, the potential for this to be a relevant hate card in a singular hero or kind of, I guess, let's say like a less diverse meta where, the hero's ability is very devastating to get turned off. This could be a very, very good sideboard hate card or even main deck. So super strong card. Hayden, are there any cards you want to talk about before I take us into the next section?
I just wanted to come back to a couple quickly. So we talked about the traps briefly. I'm excited to see what we might see with Pitfall and Rock Slide, which is the yellow and blue traps. But Tripwire Trap is a card that I've actually played quite a bit of in Ranger, and I think is a really important card into certain matchups. Dorinthia was one that I did like to play Tripwire Trap against. I think for heroes that are trying, so like Katsu, for instance, as well, where they are trying to have these triggered effects, hit effects that trigger, I think it can be super important because resources are often really tight in those decks with what they're trying to do. For Dorinthia, that could be the difference between being able to attack with their weapon again, to get the go again and only have one resource left to come in with. They might not be able to do both, right? They need to turn off Tripwire Trap to get the go again, but then they can't actually come with their weapon, things like that. So it's a card that I think has probably been a little bit underplayed and a card I actually really like.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I'm gonna have to defer to our resident Ranger expert, Hayden Dale, with the 3-month binge on Rangers. Tell me, how do we play this deck? How do we play this hero?
So funny. Class? So for some context to what Brandon keeps talking about, in late 2020, I want to say, yeah, just after Crucible came out, I spent a lot of time playing Ranger, playing Azalea. I wanted to be honest, I guess the draw for it to me was that after the first couple of weeks was pretty evident that the hero was probably the lowest power level that we had, or at least that was the perception. So I wanted to play it. I wanted to learn as much as I could about it to see if there was more to it. So I spent a good 2-3 months of armories and weekly game nights, like playing this deck, tuning it, tweaking it. Did write an article series, as Brendan said, on the Wraith Times about this. I think it's 3 parts in total. It's actually funny now. It was almost 9-10 months ago. It actually feels like years ago now that I did this. It feels like the game Monarch's come out. Even things have changed so much since then that I honestly feel like it's in a bit of a distant memory. So there's definitely things that I still think hold true from my learnings. I think there's some things that have changed in the way that people perceive and approach Ranger, which is really cool. But yeah, I do think that, I guess if I just quickly sum up my learnings from that, is that I learned a lot about the cards that were in the format. I learned a lot about the strategies you can take with Azalea, what's viable and what's not viable. And I guess a little bit about where I'm excited to see the future of Ranger go, like some of those cards I talked about that I thought really cool, like Rapid Fire, like the traps, like Poisonous Hips, but I don't think it necessarily as good in the current meta or with what we have currently with Azalea. So if we talk about, I guess, styles of the deck, Brendan, I think this is something we didn't talk about. So in terms of aggro, I guess that's the kind of the key deck, right? That's the one people have been playing the most. And it looks a lot like, if you've seen the Devastation videos from LSS, you'll see that Newson played Ranger, and that was very much the traditional aggro red line generic deck. There's arrows in there, sure, Red in the Ledger, and the Sleep Darts are in there as well. Remorseless, but primarily the deck is built around just going wide with cards like Scar for a Scar and E-Strike and Ravenous Rabble, which is also a really cool effect, obviously, because it lets you look at the next card on top of your deck and have a little bit of a peek, like Crossbone Skull Wrap does. But that's really what those aggro decks have looked like, and they haven't changed much since Azalea first came out, since Arcane Rising. That was kind of the default that people went to because it was quite easy to build, had a really active game plan. it had this mix of generics that go wide, then plus you could follow up with an arrow. And if your opponent didn't block well, they could potentially be really impacted by these on-hit effects. So that's kind of probably, I would say, like literally probably 70-80% of what we're seeing of Azalea decks so far has been that. We then also have these more mid-range decks, which are probably a little bit closer to the builds I was trying to play around with in the Crucible meta, which is, they are trying to set up in-games a lot more. So one of the cool things about Azalea, also a bit of a downside as well, is that you can go through your deck really quickly because of something like Death Dealer, where you're actively drawing more cards per turn. You're going through your deck faster. So you can actually set up this in-game and get to it a lot quicker than a lot of other heroes and classes in the format can. So these mid-range decks are a bit more about trading damage in the mid-game. They play probably less of the 2-block cards that can punish you for not being able to block efficiently. They are coming in with attacks on your own turn. They might have a 2-card hand and they're utilizing Death Dealer to like redraw so that they get the arsenal every time and blocking with 2 cards on their turn. They're playing cards like Take Cover. They're playing cards like Rock Slide Trap where it's necessary. And then they're getting to an in-game where it's a bit more sort of setup focused with things like, maybe Take Aims to dominate arrows because you've stacked your deck, or Rapid Fire for multiple attacks. Maybe they have Energy Potion even to get into play. So that's definitely the other thing. 3 of a Kind, it gets utilized there as well. We already talked about that card. And then I think the smallest, very, very small subsection of, I guess, Azalea or Ranger decks we've seen so far is definitely like this combo control sort of decks, which is what Brendan talked about with the 3 of a Kind sort of Tome of Fiendal decks. And I think that's very, very small, I would say, mostly by one player and maybe a few other players around the world. But it's, sort of 1% of the decks we've probably seen played. It's very much that aggro and then that mid-range.
Yeah, control's a weird variant for
weapon.
Azalea. Yeah, no weapon. I mean, if we look at control in Flesh and Blood, it's usually based around a weapon and attrition. Like, we don't really have control. We have like attrition.
Yes.
I remember somebody corrected me on that, but it's like, yeah, that's what it is. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Yes. Our control variant is attrition, right? It's running your opponent out of threats, and then the weapon is a recyclable threat that only costs you to pitch, and you get the card back that you pitch. So yeah, but yeah, it's weird. It's a kind of weird archetype for Azalea with no weapon like that, and we do find the version of control that you get is a combo based version that just essentially does all this damage. Yeah, exactly. It does all this damage in the end game and just it doesn't interact with the opponent very much. But
I just want to say, I think it's fine to call attrition-based decks and infliction by control, because a lot of what they're actually trying to do is control the phases of the game. So it might not be like your traditional control decks that are just trying to actively control every play that your opponent makes, but they're trying to control the phases of the game. So there's clear markers for each phase of the game. Phase 1, beginning, like that early part of the game, get through threats and preserve life. Middle part of the game, start to run the opponent through cards and chip in damage. End part of the game, have an in-game setup or have opponent with no threats fatigue. So like they are actively trying to control the game stats. Mm-hmm. Anyway, sidebar.
Yeah, take it. Yeah, it's like our little arguments with like the general public trying to get this verbiage correct. But hey, take me into the exciting part. How do we play it?
That's the exciting part. Yeah. Okay. So I think the cool thing about Azalea is that in a lot of the cards we've spoken about and the weapons, it really dictates how you play this class. So I've kind of already talked about a lot about how to play this, but I just want to talk about some of the ways that you generally want to structure turns and some of the really key and important things to remember when playing Ranger, and probably a bit more specifically Azalea, because I think we will see the Ranger playstyle change to some degree with, hopefully at least the new hero coming in Tails, but if not beyond that. So you almost always want to be starting with a card in your arsenal because that's how you get your full utilization out of Skullbone Cross Wraps. So there'll be some turns where you don't end up setting an arsenal card at the end of turn because you're actually like playing out a 5-6 card hand. I say 6 card because of Death Dealer. That you're not going to be able to have an arsenal card. But generally, especially when you're playing like this mid-range build, you generally want to be like ending with a card in arsenal, whether that be an arrow, whether it be a reload card, whether it be a defense reaction, even like the take covers is a perfect card to end in. In the aggressive decks, they're probably ending with cards in arsenal a lot less because even if they're utilizing Death Dealer, they can come on with maybe like a Ravenous Rebel, and then they can Death Dealer something, and then they can do some sort of shenanigans with either Azalea's ability or just play that arrow out. They probably only want to play one arrow per turn. Whereas the mid-range decks, I think it's very, very important because often you want to be playing multiple arrows in a turn. Or at least you definitely want to be getting the value out of Scalebone Crossrat because that card is so powerful. Yeah, anything to say there? I'm just going to kind of roll through these, Brendan, but if there's anything that you want to kind of add into, I guess, how to play Ranger, I know you're less experienced with the class, but you've played against it enough times.
I have played against it enough times that I will let you show us your magnum opus. Give us the masterclass, Hayden.
I don't know about that, but yeah, so I think having a card in Arsenal is obviously often a really powerful way that Azalea or Ranger can get extra value out of cards. And that, I actually want to add on to that as well, Death Dealer. So the reason that Death Dealer is so powerful is that you effectively, you are drawing a card, right? Like that's either replacing the card you've just put in Arsenal, which is an attack that you're going to get to play, or it's replacing the resources that you've just paid. So either way, you are getting a card out of this Death Dealer, and it is there to offset the fact that you don't have a true weapon. So it is really come down to, okay, how do I actually get the most out of Death Dealer? When I started with, Ranger, it was like my whole focus was Death Dealer is a really powerful weapon, like in the fact that it draws a card. So how do I get the most out of this? And I think maybe he wasn't able to get the most out of it just yet. We might see, we need a few more support cards maybe. But I think one of the cool things that Death Dealer does that you do, as I said before, is get through your deck, allows you to sit at the bottom of your deck, allows you to play off like 1 or 2 card hands even because of that draw ability. You want to often be trying to get the on-hit effect basically as much as possible, or at least force your opponent to block inefficiently. So that's one of the really good things about the breakpoints on a lot of the arrows. So a lot of the arrows are 4/5 on their, whether it be yellow, red, on a lot of them, are 4/5 on their attacks, which is really difficult for the opponent to block. So 5 is actually a really interesting breakpoint because it gets around, red defense reactions like Sink Below, like Favor Scene, like Reduce to Rune Chant, things like this. So that 5 breakpoint often is going to almost always draw 2 cards or a card plus equipment. And 4 kind of does a similar job in some ways. Obviously, it's not as good against the defense reactions, but against just 3 blocks, it's really important as well. So you want to structure your turns so that you can try and get your opponent to block as inefficiently as possible. And often and what we're seeing with the red line decks is like, okay, come on with go again attacks and then play an arrow that has an on-hit effect. And now it's like, okay, the opponent has to throw 2 cards at this if they want to do what they were planning to do on their turn. But one of the things I think you can do a lot with Ranger is that you can readjust your turns as you go. So say you're planning to have 3 attacks in a turn. The last one's going to be an arrow, and you're going to end with no cards in Arsenal. If you come in with the first of your go again attacks and your opponent decides to block that, okay, it's like, great, okay, now I know that I'm going to be able to probably take their whole hand here. If the card you're trying to play is like a red in the ledger, do you need to play that card this turn? Because they've already decided to block. So you can actually adjust your turn and go, okay, well, they've already blocked the 2 cards. My red and ledger now has way less impact because I know they're not going to actually try and have multiple actions on their turn. Maybe I just come in with the next attack, or even come in with a different arrow, pitch my red and the ledger to set up for late game, and come in with that arrow and just take some cards out of the hand. So there is a thing where you can, you need to be really adaptive, I think, to playing Ranger, especially as Azalea, because your game plan turn to turn might actually change based on how your opponent reacts to what you're doing. And I think it's important because you actually can run out of damage or run out of, you only have 3 red in the ledger, and I know you can play Memorial Ground and all this if people want to, but you only have 3 copies of the cards. So if you're not frugal with them, it can end up just being that your opponent just runs you out of damage, or just goes, okay, well, there's, it's known information. There's 3 red in the ledger in the graveyard. I don't have to worry about that card anymore. If you go and watch our gameplay, when me and Brendan played Chain and Azalea, Brendan talked about this exact same thing. Okay, we've seen 2 red in the ledger. That's way less of a concern now. Yeah, I think it just overall, leaving the arrows or leaving the best arrow to go second if you've rapid fired a turn and you've got 2 arrows to come in. Think about the on-hit effects and how your opponent might want to defend, what cards or what on-hit effects they care about, and structure your turns around that. Structure your game plans around those as well. If there's really key arrows that you need to play for, then be careful of how loosely you lose those cards. If you just use a red ledger just to push 5 damage and your opponent's already committed all the cards, you're paying 1 for 5. It's one of your best cards gone. So it's really important, I think. set up your deck. I know we just touched on this before, but honestly, I think this is something that's probably not done enough in Ranger decks so far, because people have probably been a bit more focused on the red line cards. Sorry, the red line strategies, but there's a lot of really powerful interactions and effects in Ranger, and that they're needed, because to be honest, there's a lot of things that don't work as well in Ranger and a little bit weaker. So I guess these interactions really offset a lot of the weaknesses of the class. And as we said already, with Death Dealer, with Scalp and Cross Wraps, you can get through your deck a lot faster than almost any hero, any class in this game. Maybe Chain's the exception to that, obviously, with the banishes, but you actually get to craft the bottom of your deck and draw into cards that you want to. So plan these end games, work them out, set them up. If you know that your opponent's really susceptible to on-hit effects late in the game when they're trying to set up their strategy, get your Remorselesses, get your Red and Ledgers to the bottom of your deck with pumps, so that you can dominate those for 8 and know that there's no way your opponent can block them out, and you're guaranteed to have those on-hit effects. And then you just need to work out ways to navigate the mid-game before you get there. Are you actively trying to get to that late game by putting pressure on your opponent, forcing them to block so that you chip a little bit of damage and get the life total low enough while preserving your own? Or are you a bit more on a defensive strategy and trying to preserve your life total that way? So you just need to work out what that looks like. One thing with Azalea in particular, but Ranger as a class, is that you can get really clunky hands. And that's really comes down to making sure that I think any Ranger deck that you build, and I think this will continue going forward, just needs to be really super tight in terms of the tools that you've got in there. One of the things I found when playing a lot of Ranger is that unless I was on that really aggressive red line strategy, a lot of cards like Scar for a Scar, like Ravenous Rabble, even like E-Strike to a degree, although E-Strike is a little bit different because it has inbuilt ability to allow you to filter cards, is that you can draw these awkward hands where you have all of the attack actions and no arrows, or you have all the arrows and no attack actions or no non-attack actions, and you can't actually utilize your hand to its fullest. So it's just really important to understand what does my average turn look like, and so how do I build my deck in a way to make sure that I'm not just going to draw dead hands. Because one turn off with Azalea could be, Azalea in particular, one turn off could be just the end of the game, especially in a format that's really quick. There could be enough punishment that you just kind of fall behind too far. I think that's kind of all of the key things I wanted to call out and how to play the class, Brendan. We talked about a lot of these things in the cards. We talked about the strategies overall, and that's just some of the key things to keep in mind when playing Ranger and in particular Azalea as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, very comprehensive. Obviously, like I talked about, you are our local expert here with how to play the Ranger class. It is probably the only class in Flesh and Blood I've actually kind of stayed away from. Other than Ranger, I tend to, as soon as I feel uncomfortable with the class or feel uncomfortable with the playstyle, I will, devote myself in a disciplined manner to just jamming that class until I learn it. Ranger's been one that I've kind of been waiting until, maybe we get into a different meta or we see some more development, and then,
go from there,
more time.
Pick it up. Yeah. So we talked about, that's kind of the structure of turns and how to play it in some degree. And then just, before we get into, I guess, how to win with Azalea, strength, weaknesses, some of the general lines or things that happen in the way that the deck plays out, you'll generally find, I think, in most Ranger builds that it's really hard to defend with, especially in those, more red line decks or decks that play the non-attack actions, because so many of those cards defend for 2, whether that's the non-attack actions like Take Aim, Poison the Tips, Silver the Tip, all these things, or it's the generics that only defend for 2, whether it be Nimblism or whatever. That can obviously be really painful, and we talked about that in terms of getting the deck built right to make sure that you don't have these awkward hands. So in terms of, I guess, staying on the front, it tends to be a lot more tempo focused with Ranger. You can certainly build with that more defensive mindset with the take covers, the favor scenes, etc. But that can also have its own problems with how awkward it makes your hands that you draw on the deck. That can actually be actively a disservice, and you can't play that in every matchup, right? If you're playing into a deck that wants to set up 5-card hands, then you need to be able to come back with your own 5-card hands. I take Rhinar as an example, a deck that wants to intimidate and set up these turns. If you are playing in a manner where you get intimidated and it ruins your whole hand because you can't block with cards from hand, you're going to be in trouble. So yeah, the early game, you're often looking to keep parity and pressure the opponent into awkward blocks, like we talked about with on-hit effects, inefficient lines, and then into the mid-game, it tends to be a lot more about making sure that you work towards your end-game. So we talked about the setup. Often starting to defend a little bit more in some cases, trade 2 cards out of your hand, but still be able to come back with maybe 1 or 2 attacks because of Death Dealer and the arrows. And then in-game, it is really firing off like these back-to-back turns that are so difficult for an opponent to get through. And that's where Azalea's hero ability really comes into its own in terms of the dominate effect to either push through on-hit effects that hurt them so that the opponent can't act out their own game plan, or even things like, searing shot where they have that extra damage, or headshot that you've put to the bottom, which is now for 6 attack. Like, you can really have these big damage turns that push through at the end if you set it up. Want to touch on how to win with Azalea. Kind of funny because I guess Azalea has probably had the least success in terms of what we've seen at a competitive level, so it has been a little bit more difficult for Azalea to get those wins. But Azalea wins games all the time. I definitely had my share of success, or I had my fair share of losses as well playing this class for so long, and I'm sure every Ranger player feels the same. So if we talk about winning with Ranger Azalea, I think the first thing we're going to talk about, and we'll just go back to it, is like having a super tuned build. The class is definitely underpowered right now. I don't think not going to sort of sugarcoat it. The class definitely feels underpowered right now. So if you have the tightest possible deck in each matchup, well, that allows you to work towards a game plan, and you don't get set behind by things like variance or awkward hands, or just, I guess, poor build quality that you might see with other heroes or other classes that can kind of get away with it because they just have the power level to get through it. If I think about some of the mech control decks from early Arcane Rising or even into Crucible, like some of those decks were so poorly built, myself included, building those, but it didn't matter because you had this really repeatable effect that could sort of get you through it. Or same with Warrior, sometimes people are playing like suboptimal builds, they don't have the right resource mix, but they can just get through it because people might not block correctly, or they're able to set up hands, or they're able to, maybe they can't utilize their hand that well, but losing a card isn't the end of the world because next turn they can have a really big 5-card hand with Iron Song Determination and Steelblade Supremacy, for instance. Whereas Ranger doesn't have that kind of get out of jail free card as much. The consistency is so much more important than the spike turns. Stick to the plan, and sometimes you just have to play to your outs. We talked about this with Kano as well, that sometimes you just have to work to your lines, and then you need to utilize cards, in this case like Skullbone Cross Wrap and Azalea's hero ability, to just play to your lines. Sometimes you're just going to have to go a little bit RNG on it, unfortunately, but that's very minimal. What you're more trying to do is obviously set up these plans, and if you need to resort, I guess, to that kind of fallback of, okay, the plan isn't quite come together, I just have to hope that this card's on top. I know there's a reasonable chance that there's 2 Red Ledgers left in the deck. I need to hit one this turn. I've got 10 cards I haven't seen. I'm just got to flip it, and hope I had that chance. As actually, and we saw that in the game we played, Brennan, the Chain versus Azalea game that's up on Channel Fireball. We saw a little bit of that come into play with having to play.
What was the next card too?
It was always the next card. Yeah, so the manipulation obviously helps smooth out some of the issues that other decks have as well. So you have this inbuilt ability to filter cards because of Death Dealer, to filter cards because of Skullbone Cross Wrap. So you're actually one of the biggest strengths of Azalea and how to win a lot of your games, Ranger and in particular Azalea, is actually your consistency, your ability to get the cards that you need at the right time. And I would just say, stick to the plans with Azalea, learn them, learn how you're going to plan to each matchup, and just keep at it. There's going to be small tweaks you need to make, cards that don't quite work, that are a bit awkward, that you can't filter as well, that you definitely don't want to have an arsenal, that you don't want to see in certain hands, and you'll work that out. It won't take long to just play some games and work it out.
So Hayden, in pursuit of brevity for this, we are going to evolve the strength and weaknesses section. So I'm going to ask you to give me rapid fire 3 strengths and 3 weaknesses. Go.
Yeah, I think we've already talked about quite a few of these, so I want to just tie them together. The first strength and the biggest strength, I think, and it can't be looked past, and I'm just going to say, is Skullbone Cross Wraps. You have access to one of the most powerful pieces of equipment in the game, so utilize it. Build the deck to utilize that card to its fullest. I think it's one of the biggest strengths of Ranger that we're going to see going forward is access to this equipment, and it makes me actively want to play this class because of the power level of Skullbone Cross Wraps. The other one for Azalea specifically is the hero ability. So the hero ability gives you this inbuilt evasion, a way to dominate, and that pairs with And it's also at the cost of no resources and at the cost of no card, which you can't say the same for Bravo, for instance. And that pairs with, I think, what is the third biggest strength of the Ranger class is the on-hit effects of arrows, and there's no need for thresholds. Any damage out of those cards is good enough. So pairing it with evasion is fantastic because they have to block all of it. Pairing it with any kind of attack reaction is fantastic. Art of War, for instance, even on in the reactions phase, is often good enough to get through the on-hit effects. So super powerful. And I'm gonna steal 4 here quickly, Brendan, because I think Death Dealer is just a really powerful weapon, and the ability that I said before that it draws your card.
Always breaking the rules.
Always breaking the rules. Got to. Weaknesses? All right.
Yeah.
So I think one of the top weaknesses for me is that you have Red in the Ledger. You could count Remorseless in this to some degree, although it's not as effective against a lot of classes. And you've Sleep Dart as probably relevant, higher powerful on-hit effects right now in that deck. That's kind of it, unfortunately. That's one of the real big weaknesses, is that if you don't see your right arrows in the right games, you really can be at the mercy of just being run over by decks that either have more damage or have more ability to out card advantage you, able to defend with 2 cards, come with 2 cards, and you can't block efficiently because of your defense. So I think that's a really important weakness. Your weapon, while a massive positive, we talked about Death Dealer already, you don't actually have a traditional weapon. So that hurts in a lot of matchups, and it means that your game plans become so much more linear because you can't adjust and adapt on the fly to go, okay, well, actually, I just block with 3 cards here and come in with my weapon this turn. Or I can attack 3 times and then come with my weapon at the end of the chain. Like it just sets you into a pattern a lot more than any other class does. Even, to be honest, even Kano to an extent, because the combination of the weapon and your hero ability lets you do certain things. Whereas Ranger, it's like, okay, if I actively don't have the right hand here, my weapon is going to do basically nothing. And then I'm just looking through, because I do have a few weaknesses, Brendan, just looking at the one I think is really important. We talked about the one-dimensionality of it to some degree. I think this is a good one. I think this might have been one that you've added onto the end, Brendan, but the deck is literally harder to play than Kano. I'm guessing that's your opinion. I'll let you talk about this.
Oh, you stole my thing, dude. Yeah, so the only one I actually on here, the deck is actually literally harder to play than Kano. It is the hardest deck to play in the game. That isn't actually because of its power level. So you would think that that's correlated to Ranger maybe being slightly underpowered. No, it's not. It's actually just the design. The deck is harder to deck stack than Kano, in my opinion. You have to track way more intricately. A lot more things matter. Or Kano, it's a pretty straightforward sequence. It is a bit challenging to get the resources right and get the exact card order on top and make it on top when it needs to be on top. But yeah, Ranger, I think, is the most challenging class to play in Flesh and Blood, which is funny because I think it's the first pet deck of many players. But obviously the Redliner deck doesn't really fall into that category. The Redliner deck is a traditional aggro deck, probably still harder to play than a lot of the other aggro decks, but Ranger in general with the deck stacking is, in my opinion, the hardest class to play in Flesh and Blood.
Yep, and I think I agree. My time spent playing that sort of mid-range builds of the deck, it was not only do you have to be like, okay, I have a blue here and then I have X damage here. It's like, no, I need this setup of cards. I need the take aim plus the remorseless plus the rapid fire plus whatever. Like I'm setting up way more intricately, as you say. So yeah, it is harder. And I won't lie, like the power level does make it difficult as well. Like I think you said, it's not just because of the power level, but the power level impact is there. It is real. The class today has felt a bit underpowered, which does make it hard to play as well. Hard to win with, at least, anyway.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Let's go to matchups.
Yeah, so I think rather than talk about, and this is something we've done in the past, is we've talked a bit more specifically about the matchups in the current meta. We're going to shy away from this a little bit moving forward with our class deep dives and just talk about more holistically the matchups and how they tend to play out, key cards, and just how it kind of feels the classes play into each other. So let's get into it with Rhinar, Brennan. Generally, Ranger is it's gonna be a race with Ranger and Rhinar. Rhinar likes the fact that they want to keep those 5-card hands and come back at you. Generally, if they're playing, especially if they're playing claws builds, and if you're playing these traditional Ranger builds, you want to come with 5-card hands as well. Thankfully, your cards have on-hit effects, which is really important. But what Reiner can do is they can actually adapt a little bit, play something like the Romping Club and be a lot more defensive and just try and chip you down. So, there's ways that game plans can be adaptive. Both decks are going to try and set up an end game, though, I think. And if you, as the Ranger player, can get through your deck faster, you have potential to get to that end game faster, which is really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I could lead with Dorinthia as well. Dorinthia does seem like a pretty challenging matchup for Azalea. Azalea just doesn't block well, and Dorinthia does pretty well, pretty decent against classes that don't block well. The one thing that is kind of working for Azalea, obviously depending on your weapon, is Azalea can kind of do quite a bit with not a lot of cards. Where like a class like Prism or like Warrior even can't do a lot with a few cards. So I think that does help you out in the aggro matchups. That being said, I think it does tend to wilt versus something like Dorinthia, where Dorinthia is hard to race because of the sort of snowballing effect. So there are a lot of decks that will do a lot of damage, and you can choose to not block, and there'd be nasty hit triggers. The tough part of that with Dorinthia is that Dorinthia just keeps getting more powerful turn to turn if you do something like that. So you're just digging yourself a deeper hole through the kind of 3-4 turns that the game is going to last.
Yeah, it's really tough to outrace Dorinthia, and even if you find a way to connect with some on-hit effects, there's no one arrow that kind of stops them from being able to guarantee they can keep their counters. So you might be able to guarantee that they can't come in with a weapon again and get extra counters, but if you come in with like the sleep dart, or even the one that stops red ledger or something stops go again, but they could just come in for 4 or 5 with the counters on their weapon plus an attack reaction and still guarantee they keep the counters and take cards out of your hand. So it's really difficult. One of the ways that I have played this matchup traditionally is more focused around those cards like Take Cover and Rock Slide Trap, and trying to not let the Dorinthia player snowball whatsoever. So basically utilizing these cards to try and efficiently defend, take some damage around the sides, come back with my own damage, force them to block key on hit effects, and play with like 2 or 3 card hands, because it's way easier to play against Dorinthia when they don't have 5 card hands. You know how they can play it out, and then get to basically turns where they a little bit weaker. They come in with just Dawnblade. They're reliant on the reactions rather than the non-attack actions. Take that damage and then come in with my own turns to push damage and on-hit effects. That's kind of how I was finding some success into Dorinthia.
Yeah, and next into a little bit of Blitz, we got Ira. Very, very bad matchup for Azalea. I've actually tested it extensively. It's just, what's funny is actually one of the best cards for Azalea in that matchup is going to be Feign Death. It shuts down a lot of big attacks by Ira. That being said, though, if you use Azalea's ability, flip a Feign Death against an Ira, you basically lose on the spot. So it makes you kind of want to go down to 1 Feign Death because you never want to see 2. You also never want to draw them, things like this. It's an interesting matchup. Maybe you can kind of win with like a big dominate, but then again, I tested it mostly against Drone Ira, which ran a lot of defense reactions, so really was well equipped to deal with that strategy. And of course, Go Again is just slapped by Flick Flack. Flick Flack is the biggest buzzkill of any Go Again strategy. So tough matchup in Blitz, and it's probably the main reason why we really don't see a lot of Azalea currently in Blitzes. Ira is just such a bully, so efficient, and it's really got an answer for everything Azalea is going to try to do, or Ranger. That being said, Azalea.
Yeah, I agree. And I might just talk about Katsu in the same breath as well. We're talking about Ninja. Both of these decks are ones that tend to want to be aggressive and push damage and have on-hit effects. The scary thing for Ranger is that Ninja has Mask of Momentum, which is a really powerful on-hit effect. So again, that kind of matchup comes down to often who gets the tempo and who can kind of keep it. If you can land these really important on-hit effects into Ninja, whether it be, actually most of the on-hit effects are really important. Even some of the weaker ones or traditionally weaker ones, out of the commons, like Hamstring Shot, for instance, still really important because their resource base is so much lower. That plus Remorse is obviously really good when they're trying to go wide and you can race them. Red Ledger, amazing against Katsu, of course. So I think that their matchups actually, it can be really close, and one that Ranger doesn't mind playing into because it is again just racing, but your on-hit effects can often just be better than theirs, which is good. Kano, I think this is actually a matchup where Kano doesn't really care about any of your arrows, which is really difficult. So the on-hit effects you have aren't very relevant here, other than I guess the ones that deal more damage, like Searing Shot. for Ranger to only be able to play one action during their turn, or to be hit with Remorseless, or to be hit with Sleep Dart. Like even Sleep Dart, it might seem like it's good, but they can just often Kano isn't actually wanting to use their hero ability in their own turn. They just want to play out, like a Voltic Bolt for 6 or something, block with 2 cards. So that kind of game plan that Kano probably wants to follow in this matchup works really well into what you're trying to do. And then at the same time, your resource space is really low, especially in these aggressive redline decks. If you come in with your whole hand and Kano has just like good natural draw of combo damage with like Aether Flare or something, they can just go for it and punish you. This is a deck that I think that can use Erina's Prayer, even in Blitz to an extent, because you can get that card away with Death Dealer and with Azalea's hero ability, and you can sideboard it pretty well. I think it's a card that can be pretty reasonable. And Feign Death isn't awful either.
Mm-hmm.
Where are we at to next? We should go to Bravo. This is probably, in my experience so far, the toughest for Ranger to deal with is Bravo's Crush abilities, or the Guardian class as a whole. That's coming in with these massive go-to attacks that you can't defend very well, that have crush effects that can basically break up your whole turn. Something like a Spinal Crush is probably going to take your whole turn. The Crippling Crush is just going to be devastating, and you're going to take a lot of damage, plus potentially going to be able to come in with a 2-card hand, which can be really tough. Even some of the more minor ones like Disable, that's really powerful into because your arsenal is so important. So yeah, like someone just playing out like a yellow Disable for 8 is really tough. You're trying to come with this 5-card hand and utilize your arsenal into Bravo, and then all of a sudden you have to defend with 2 cards to protect your arsenal. So it's a really interesting matchup. I think it tends to be probably Ranger's toughest because of the design of the 2 classes battling into each other.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to win that matchup, I think you basically have to get on the front foot, and they have defense reactions. They have really good equipment suites, so you just kind of have to hope that you can get ahead enough that once they kind of use their equipment up or they draw hands with no defense reactions, you can really punish them for it. Okay, we're to next. Viserai.
Favorite matchup, right?
What's that, sorry?
This is your favorite matchup, right?
Viserai. So I really like this because I played a lot of it in the limited format and the Arcane meta, mostly actually from the Viserai side, because I played a lot of Viserai when Arcane Rising first came out. But it's one I actually really enjoyed because it's really interesting. Like Viserai doesn't obviously defend rune challenge very well, but Viserai on the other hand has trouble with a lot of the arrow effects. These Viserai decks that want to obviously utilize the hero ability, Sleep Dart really good. They want to be able to play a non-attack action to an attack action. Red Ledger very good. Hamstring Construct can even sometimes mess up their counts with their rune chance, because it will obviously reduce the attack. So if you had like 7 rune chance and you get Hamstring Shot and then play Arknight Ascendancy, you can still play it because it actually reduces the cost. That's fine. But on some of them it doesn't work as well. So yeah, it can be a really interesting matchup. I think I split a lot of games with Azalea early on with Viserai and against Viserai, which is, it's quite interesting. I think you basically want to try and pick their turns where they're trying to do powerful things, whether it be like Mordred Tide or Arknight Ascendancy or Ninth Blade, or going wide with Rune Flash, whatever it is, and just try and like hit those turns with key arrows.
Mm-hmm.
Mech Control was like a really, or the mid-range deck was like a really prominent deck in that previous Crucible Arcane Rising format, and Azalea was one that could actually match up depending on the build and what was happening in the matchup. But the fact that you could set up these in games that could be difficult for the dash decks to deal with was really important. You could be on the back foot early if they had like multiple chambers. That could be really tough for you. But things like, again, Red Ledger are a fantastic card in this matchup because they're obviously trying to get multiple go against with their weapons, and that's their whole game plan. So if you're able to get a Red Ledger through, you probably basically time walk them, which is fantastic. Just make on-hit effects count.
And now we're gonna really test you with the Monarch.
Yeah, so I don't have much to say, I guess, about the Levier Bolton prison side, and if we talk about those from a class perspective, we already talked about Warrior and the on-hit effects from both sides and how they're important. It's going to be the same, to be honest, with Bolton in so many ways, because they have the ability to come in, with like Bolts of Courage and Engulfing Lights and these on-hit effects that can be really difficult for you to block with just one card, because you have non-attack actions, which is fantastic against them, but they're not going to be able to block out their on-hit effects. because it's 2 versus 3 or 4 attack. Livia, we talked about Brute. I think it's a little bit the same with Rhinar, and that they're going to try and do big damage and set up these big 5-card hands and push through with playing cards from Banished. So you can hurt them in certain ways, like Sleep Dart, for instance. Fantastic against Livia, who's potentially taking a lot of blood debt. I think there's a few. Your on-hit effects can definitely have
Sleep Dart is actually really, really good here.
Yeah.
Sleep Dart is devastating, I think, versus Livia.
Yeah. I mean, the card overall, I think we've said it, Red Ledger and Sleep Dart, I genuinely think are the 2 best arrows, just because they have the most widespread effect, I think. Even again, Red Ledger is good against Livia, who's trying to potentially, like roll Scabskin Leathers or trying to play multiple cards out of Banish or whatever it might be. But let's talk about Chain, Brennan. The big big bad man. Well, let's get your opinion, because obviously we just played that matchup for a video. What did you kind of think of that matchup overall?
Yeah, I'll do something very special here, and in pre-Road to Nats fashion, I'm actually going to give you my real 100% unfiltered opinion. So Azalea saw a success. I can't say a lot of success, but did see success in the charity tournament, which was actually quite dominated by Chain. And it was thought that this Azalea deck actually had a success off the back of playing a lot of Chains in Swiss, right? Well, I think it actually turned out that they didn't play too many Chains and had quite a few buys. So we had a bit of weird data there. Anyway, I think it's like very unfavored for Azalea, not because the on-hit effects don't matter, but just because there's like so few that Chain actually cares about, and you have to hit them. It's not even like you have to hit Chain with the effects, which is hard to do in itself, because Chain has like the mega Yeti like bro fridge. Like it's so hard to get through. Like your dominant attacks are rarely going to hit. But you have to hit him at the perfect time, because if you hit him with a Red in the Ledger like turn 1 to 2, he literally doesn't care. He just plays out like an E-Strike, plays out a command card, could even play out a Ghostly Visit. It doesn't matter. And then Arsenal card. Doesn't matter. Like, but if you hit him with a Red in the Ledger on like Shackle 4 or maybe Sleep Dead like Shackle 5, which is like late in the game, yeah, maybe he'll take some Blood Debt and have an inefficient turn. But you have to do it back to back to back. Which is really hard to do. And like I talked about, Chain's armor really helps him as well. I just think this is massively Chain favored. And then Chain is like and we talked to Azalea not being able to block well and all this kind of stuff. Chain is presenting many relevant on-hit triggers and coming in for sometimes 20 plus with Art of Wars. So it's like, think about it, as Azalea, you're only going to see like 20-ish cards of your deck. Like you're hardly going to see any cards. And you really just got to have the absolute gas to beat Chain, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's very true of the current state of the meta. If I talk about this a bit more holistically, I think that, and if you talk about on paper, which is where I guess a lot of this theory has come from, that Ranger has these really strong on-hit effects that work really well into Chain. The issue, as you've kind of pointed to, or more alluded to, I guess, is that the consistency of being able to have the right on-hit effects. You only have 3 Red in Ledger, you only have 3, or I guess 3 Red Sleep Dart anyway. That unless you can be back to back to back, like hitting these and have the right support structure, you're not going to be able to impact it enough, which is kind of the current feeling. But going forward, we don't know what Ranger's going to look like. Maybe some of these arrows, like a Sleep Dart, still become super relevant in different shells, or we get some other cards that help Azalea out. They can be more consistent and can sort of battle with these strategies like Chain has, because when you look at it and you look at it in theory, like the on-hit effects should be a powerful way to attack Chain. It's just really difficult to get that consistency and have it play out in the way that you maybe need to against the current sort of iterations of decks.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that covers it for matchups. Hayden, why don't you kind of wrap us up real quick and we'll close out.
Yep, so we're going to go through, as we always do, just how to win with the deck. It's really, I guess, a tie-up of a lot of the principles and key philosophies that we've spoken about with Ranger as a class, and in particular with Azalea and how that plays out right now. So setting up turns, that's, I think, where we start. It's really important to know how you're going to execute your turn, setting up for the combinations of cards that you might be able to find. So if you're starting with a card in Arsenal, what is that card going to turn into? If it's not going to be that card by the time your turn finishes, what does that card want to be, or what do you want it to be, or what are you actually going to do with your Death Dealer? What are you going to do with your non-attack actions? What are you going to do with your reloads? Like, it's really important that you know what you're going to do with these and set it up to get the most out of it. The other thing is keep Arsenal. I think that's, especially for the mid-range decks, is super important to how you get the most out of your deck. pitch for the bottom. So pitch for these in-game scenarios. Know how you want to finish off games. Like the Dominate hero ability is super powerful. Skullbone Crosswrap is super powerful. So utilize these cards to get a setup for the in-game. Make the arrows count. This kind of continues on from that. Whenever you're playing out these really important arrows for the specific matchup, you need to make them count. If you're playing them just for damage, it's probably going to end up that you don't have enough, I guess, relevant effects to push your opponent to block inefficiently or to take some damage that's going to hurt their turn. And then get the full set of Skullbone Crosswraps. I just can't really, I guess, overstate how important this card is to the Ranger class and to even to Azalea right now. The card just has so much inbuilt power. It's just how can you get the most out of that, I think, in conjunction with right now, especially Death Dealer, but potentially with other weapons and other heroes and strategies in the future. How to beat it, Brennan. So what you're going to do is in CC, you're going to shuffle up your deck and you're going to present it to the Azalea player.
I can't believe you would do our Azalea fans like that. That is absolutely not true.
I'm kidding mostly, but obviously we've talked about it already that it does feel that right now Azalea is in a bit of a weaker spot. Maybe better than it has been in the past. It still can be very difficult, I think, to be competitive. I called it already that I think we're going to see an Azalea take an invite to nationals over the next couple of weeks, and I believe it. I think
Hayden says a lot of things though. Remember, blonde hair, all this stuff. Now
I never said Azalea. That, so you can quote the things I've said back to me.
Can't trust this man.
But I do think that it is obviously a bit of a tough spot. But to beat it, you need to ensure that basically you aren't getting hit with the most relevant on-hit effects to you. So Brendan already talked about this before with like the chain example. If you're throwing your equipment at a hamstring shot that does nothing to you in the matchup, or to a searing shot that you don't care about, that's going to be a way that you could potentially lose the game when they then start coming in with their sleep darts and their rhythm ledgers and their remorselesses, and now you're having to take that damage instead. So just using your equipment really efficiently, thinking about how they're trying to sequence their turn and what arrows would hurt you the most and how you can actually mitigate that as much as possible. The on-hit effects obviously are great. Some they can play off 2 to 3 cards at hands as well because of Death Dealer. So they will be trying to block, and you can or they won't be trying to block and try and go wide, and you just need to kind of react to what they're doing to some degree. So if you see that you come in with maybe 1, 2 attacks, and you're going wide and your Azalea opponent's just like holding back, they're obviously trying to play a 5-card hand. So is there a way that you can punish their 5-card hand? Cards like Command and Conquer, Disable, obviously really, really strong for this ability because they punish the Arsenal, which is super important to Azalea. But even cards like Snatch can be super important because it's an on-hit effect they probably don't want to block out. So anything with on-hit effects that go back at Azalea are really important as well, and a good way to beat it. We talked about the Katsu matchup. Obviously, they have a lot of on-hit effects. The awkward thing for Katsu is, like Azalea, they maybe don't defend as well, and they kind of want to play their 5-card hands. Bravo, for instance, the reason that's a really strong matchup is because they have on-hit effects, and they also defend well. So it's kind of like the worst-case scenario for Azalea.
All right, and that wraps up our Ranger class deep dive, our 101, Nock the pod. Yeah. So I hope you guys all enjoyed it. Be sure to shoot us a comment in the YouTube videos, for what hero you'd like to see next. It is very exciting with a new Ranger coming out in Tales of Aria. So who knows what other 2 classes we will see alongside that. It does look like it's just going to be 3. So who knows what the other 2 are going to be. I'm hoping for a bard myself. Going to sing a bit of Tales, cry, have my opponents cry me a river of tears and sing them a nice little song on bard. But we shall see. Like I said, no speculation because LSS always baits us. But with that, just want to shout out, we did talk a lot about Azalea. We do have the Azalea versus Chain video, which for me is one of my favorite videos we've ever done, mostly because of the banter. That is up on Channel Fireball. You'll find it in the dark corner crevice or wherever they put it because apparently nobody has seen it. So go check it out. I think it's really good. Also, our YouTube channel, we have had a massive focus on YouTube recently. So that is Arsenal Pass on YouTube. We've been doing deck techs, gameplays. Most recently, we did the Prism deck tech, very detailed sideboard guide, all that good stuff. We have been absolutely exploding in subscribers. Honestly, closing in on 1,000 here soon enough. I feel like not too long ago, we were hitting 500 and Hayden was promising us all he was going to dye his hair. Still, it's in the works, but we'll figure out. Maybe we'll get him something nice for 1,000. Who knows? So yeah, go check out our YouTube. It's just a subscription. It helps us out a ton. So Just want to also mention, which we've started been mentioning at the end of these podcasts, is Hayden and I are both on Twitter now. Us boomers have figured out how to use technology, so you can find me at the Fitty Shades. That's THE Fitty Shades, like the erotic novel. So that's me, and then Hayden is at Fiendel, as in Toma Fiendel, so FYEN_Dale. So go shoot us a follow. You can engage us on there. We talk to people all the time, and we love interacting with you guys.
Yep.
So.
And lastly, I just wanted to jump in because we talked about obviously Ranger podcast. I'm going to pop the link for the video down in the description. So if you are looking for that, then it's all there for you. And also, just be careful what you believe when Brendan talks.
All right. Before I was rudely interrupted by this man and liar, that I do want to mention that if you are interested in this podcast, we do have a sub podcast called Time in the Round. So Arsenal Pass Time in the Round is a YouTube exclusive, and we do a very freeform content, no real topics, and kind of talk about our own personal opinions of the game, what we're doing, all that good stuff. We have some fun stuff thrown in as well. Last week was Hat Week, so super exciting. And with that, that is the conclusion of episode 16, the Ranger 101 class deep dive. So until next time, we will see you next week.
See you later.